Yo, what's up guys? I wanted to make a video going over a build that I created that really has two parts. One for basically general game content that you can do using Shadow Imbuement and Poison Imbuement, and then when you're really trying to push your Nightmare Sigils into like 30 levels higher than you are, I have another very similar build with a little bit of variation to use Cold Imbuement in order to completely annihilate a lot of the elites in really high level Nightmare Sigils to make it a lot easier. Okay, but we're first going to talk about the more general build that I use, and that is going to be what I have here. Obviously, if you're doing Flurry, and this is a Flurry-based build, then we're going to be using Puncture and getting the guaranteed vulnerable hit so that we can spread vulnerable. We use Sturdy and a little bit of healing from Siphoning Strikes for more sustain. And then we get Flurry and upgrade it, obviously, up to the top left to spread vulnerable. We get Stutter Step to improve our dungeon speed by giving us Critical Strike, giving us movement speed so we can get through the dungeon quicker. And now if you're doing content that is really easy, I took Smoke Grenade here, but you can actually take Shadow Step and Dash in order to help improve your clear time, because it really, Diablo comes down to efficiency, and if you want to be, leveling very quickly, then you don't really need Smoke Grenade for basically most content because you're not really scared of dying. So you can take out Smoke Grenade here and put it into Shadow Step, and then also have Dash. Then we have Weapon Mastery, of course, and then because we're using Smoke Grenade, or we have the boots that give us daze, then having these two perks here will give us Critical Strike whenever we knock a player down, or knock an enemy down when we daze them. Really simple. And then this is kind of an interesting part of the build that I don't really see too often, which is getting Smoke Grenade, right? And because we're a very lucky hit based build, because we're Flurry and not Twisting Blade, we're going to have a lot of lucky hit, and a lot of our build comes down to lucky hit. And we're going to be able to reduce the cooldown of Smoke Grenade with the last perk, get 15% increased damage, and when you're killing a bunch of elites in the higher Nightmare Sigils, having Smoke Grenade is huge, because basically you Smoke Grenade every elite pack and blow them up during that crowd control. It's really good. That's kind of the main crux of the build. And then we have Exploit, because when we go for an elite pack and they're healthy, we Smoke Grenade, pop Cold Imbuement, get 3 combo points and blow them up. So having Exploit for the initial damage is actually pretty huge because we activated a lot. And then Malice is obviously really good because we were putting vulnerable on everything. And then we have Shadow Imbuement, which this build with Shadow Imbuement is better for single target, because one Shadow Imbuement can actually explode when it expires on a boss. It gives you Critical Strike against injured targets, which is good on a boss. And then it also gives you 12% non-physical damage, which again is good when you're freaking comboing it with Poison Imbuement, because Poison Imbuement is kind of our good single target ability. But the weird thing that makes it kind of weird to use Poison Imbuement as a Flurry rogue is that the poison that you get from it isn't as good as a Twisting Blade build, because Twisting Blade will activate the poison effect multiple times when you have the Spinning Blade perk on it. And for Flurry, the base damage isn't that high. So like if we're doing 100k damage with the, with our right click, right, and then that doesn't get affected by the poison. So the poison only affects the base damage. So even if you crit for 100k, it's not like your poison dot is going to be 100k damage. It's only going to be 10k, because the poison is only affecting the base damage, which isn't that high with Flurry, unfortunately, especially for single target. So unlike Twisting Blade, this build won't be crazy for single target and kill a boss in like 2 seconds. Instead, it's like a better clear dungeon build. That's why I don't put too many points. I only put 1 in each. Because if I was a Twisting Blade rogue, you'd put more, but as a Flurry rogue, I only put 1. And then here we go into Poison, Deadly Venom, to get poison damage, and then really just to get the 15% less damage taken, which is really good when you're pushing content, and then 1 point in for attack speed in that. And because we're kind of using a lot of lucky hit, you're going to want to get innervation. And if you're having energy issues, you might want to take points out of your stutter step and put them in here to give you more energy regen, which I don't really have energy issues unless I'm fighting a boss. So generally I don't need innervation for most content. And then you get Alchemist Fortune because lucky hit is huge, and this gives us lucky hit. And then you get Adrenaline Rush, and lastly Haste for more movement speed and attack speed when you're fighting a boss. And then lastly, there are 2 variations that I like. I mean, technically there would be 3 with Victimize, but I haven't been using it too much because I think Victimize is boring. If you're doing really hard content, then Momentum might be really good for you because it gives you movement speed and it gives you damage reduction, which is good when you're pushing higher sigils. And you can tie the Momentum perk here with the healing over time when you have momentum stacks up, which again gives you a lot of survivability. But you honestly don't need that, and in the background you're going to see me clearing a dungeon with close quarters combat with my Shadow Imbuement build. So if I can kill things that are like 22 levels higher than me, then with close quarters combat, then you probably don't need momentum. And close quarters combat gives us a lot of damage because we basically have 100% uptime on the second part of the perk, giving us 20% increased damage to crowd control. Okay, so now that I've gone over the Shadow Imbuement build, the only changes you're going to want to make for when you're doing really hard content is taking out your points in Shadow Imbuement and putting them in Cold Imbuement. Cold Imbuement does, one, it can freeze the target, which is really good for additional crowd control, and Cold Imbuement gives us a 20% additional damage or 40% additional damage when things are frozen. So if you freeze something with Cold Imbuement, you're getting 40% more damage with this ability, which is huge for your Flurry and when you're trying to kill elites. And then you'd want to take your points out of Stutter Step and put them here into Frigid Finesse, which gives you even more damage to frozen targets. And now with this build, and I'm going to put in the background me going through a dungeon with Cold Imbuement, you're going to see how quick I'm killing a lot of elites with this build, because with Smoke Grenade, basically dazing them, I can knock them down for 12% more critical strike during the Smoke Grenade, and I'm going to freeze them and get even like 70% more damage or something with Cold Imbuement active on a present target. And when you do this build, let me head over to my stash real quick. You're going to want to be using things that help you chill or freeze. So things like the Pentinent Greaves, I think it's called, which chills targets when you walk by them, is really big for this build. Or alternatively, you have Frostburn. And with Frostburn, I like to run a different combo than with my Shadow Imbuement build. And for my Shadow Imbuement build, I like running, normal legendaries where you have vulnerable enemies can be dazed by you, which is really good in general because you're constantly having everything vulnerable and you're constantly dazing, and then you're knocking them down, getting your crit chance from that perk I showed you. And also, you get additional critical strike whenever you make a target vulnerable, which is a great combo, and you can still use it for this cold build. But because if you do additional frozen damage, you can actually forego the daze vulnerable targets for Frostburn, which will freeze a target, which kind of acts similar to the daze. And then you can put on a perk like this, and this is really important when you're pushing higher and higher content, because it makes your chilled effects on things give you poison, imbuement, extra damage, and applies chill and can freeze the target as well a lot quicker. So the general combo would be Smoke Grenade, Cold Imbuement, hitting huge Cold Imbuments. And if you're doing like if I'm level 70, I'm doing a level 105 dungeon, they're probably not going to be dead during that Cold Imbuement. And then I activate Poison Imbuement and get 25% up to 25% additional damage, and I can freeze them a lot quicker with Poison Imbuement. So it's kind of like a wombo combo whenever you're killing elites to blow them up even faster. And whenever I'm pushing content, I use my Cold Imbuement build that I showed you, as well as Frostburn and this Noxious Ice perk. It goes hand in hand, and it's incredible. But now that we're on the topic of gear, let's talk about what gear I'm running for this build. So we're going to be auto attacking a lot. So having the basic skill grants 20% damage reduction is huge. And the stats on my helmet are generally going to be tanky, but you want to make sure that on gear you want cooldown reduction, because the main thing about this build is that you want to have really high imbuement uptime. Excuse me, because imbuments are what gives the build really, really good damage. So because that is important, then you want to have cooldown reduction on everything. But let's keep going. Tankiness on the helmet, you want armor, maximum health, maybe damage reduction, main stat. And then on the chest, same concept, maximum life, damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, more armor, and then imbuement skill damage I like because my imbuments are what I do most of my damage with, and it allows me, it's just a nice damage perk. And on this one, you get the increased armor for everything every time you deal damage to a target, which you do a lot of repeated damage with Flurry, so you can stack this up extremely quickly. So you want that on your chest. Again, you want more tankiness. With the gloves, you're going to want to make sure that you get ranks of Flurry, tag speed, critical strike, and things like dexterity are all really, really important. If you can get like a god set of gloves like I have now, it's really big. Or if you want to get Frostburn, because Frostburn is kind of really cool and I like it a lot. And yeah, so if you get Frostburn, that's another alternative. And the perk I put on it is whenever you make a target vulnerable, you get crit. Same thing with the helmet and chest. Your pants are going to want to be tanky, so I got damage reduction, maximum life, dodge chance, all extremely good for your pants. And then I have imbuement skill, cooldown reduction. Like I said earlier, cooldown reduction is good. And on this, if you're running momentum, then you can run the momentum healing perk. But because I'm not running momentum, I'm running the barrier whenever you hit an elite. And lastly, on the boots, you're going to want energy reduction, movement speed, dodge, and then I like having dash because it allows me to save a point from putting a point into dash in my build, and I can put that point in other parts of my build. And then you want the vulnerable enemy has up to 39% chance to daze. Now, if you have Pentinate Greaves, obviously you won't have this perk here, then I would forego the critical strike chance perk on your gloves and put the daze on your gloves instead. And lastly, for the weapon, again, because I'm doing so much imbuement damage, I actually put my imbuement skill effects have an 80% increased potency against vulnerable targets on my bow, because it's a huge damage buff. And for your bow, the main sets you're going to want are critical strike damage, damage to close enemies, vulnerable damage, dexterity, or increased to all stats. Anything that is like one of those perks is really good. And in fact, I'm not happy because this particular bow is almost a god roll, but then I have increased damage with traps, and I'm not running a trap build. So yeah, it's not perfect, but pretty good. And for the gems, you're going to want the green gems that give you critical strike damage. For the necklace, I put, because you get 50% additional aspect power for an amulet, I put the skills have more potency when you're higher primary source, which is really good in general. And you're going to want cooldown reduction on this, maybe ranks of weapon mastery, ranks of malice, dexterity, things of that nature, or more imbuement skill damage is really good. For Flurry, the ranks of all imbuement skills is actually not that good, because the secondary stats on it, like if you put a point in, let's say, Shadow Imbuement, it only gives you more AoE damage, doesn't really affect anything else. So the initial burst damage that you do with it doesn't get affected. With poison damage, same thing. All putting a point into poison imbuement does is increase the amount of poison over time. And like I said, you don't get a lot of damage with the poison over time with Flurry because of the way poison imbuement works. So in general, you don't want skills into poison imbuement or any other imbuement outside of the initial one that you put in. So this perk, it looks really good for our build, the ranks of all imbuments, but I don't really like it all too much. But yeah, if you can get weapon mastery, malice, cooldown reduction, dexterity, things of that nature, it's really good. And then we have critical strikes with poison imbuement, have a chance to create a pool and give us infinite poison imbuement, or another really good perk to have with our build, because whenever you're on a single target fight, this perk will allow you to basically infinitely spam your poison imbuement for more and more damage. And it's really good whenever you're fighting big packs of elites and you need to keep your imbuement uptime high. And then on this, again, you can want vulnerable damage, critical strike chance, critical strike damage, lucky hit chance like I have is really good as well. Even maximum energy is pretty good. And then for the next one, I have Flurry deals more damage. Again, You need this perk to have maximum effect for AoE, and it's a nice thing to put on your rings. I don't put it on my bow or my amulet because I think these other perks are stronger. Again, vulnerable damage, like I said, every stat for this one you could want for this one as well. Now for the weapons, one of the main things you're going to want is condemnation, because it makes your right click, your flurry, deal 30% or 32, even up to 40% more damage whenever you have 3 combo points, and it can give you 3 combo points randomly. So this will increase your freaking damage astronomically. And outside of that, for the weapon, again, you're going to want critical strike damage, critical strike chance, damage to close enemies, vulnerable damage, dexterity, maybe all stat. I have a pretty good god roll here. And like your bow, for the gems, you're going to want critical strike to damage to vulnerable enemies. Obviously, because we have a lot of combo point things in our build, you're going to be running combo points for your specialization. Okay, and this is going to be the Paragon board portion of this, and this is kind of what I came up with. Now, I'm sure there's many different ways to theory craft and come up with optimal damage, but as of right now, this is kind of what I came up with. So you're going to want to head up, grab this node for more damage and life, head up and grab the combat glyph, which is going to give us more energy back, which we need in this build, and more critical strike damage. And so you're going to want to grab as much intelligence as you can in this board. Make sure to grab the 5% damage buffs because they're extremely important. And while we're here, we might as well grab the armor buff and head up into the tricks of the trade. Head up and grab this to the left, which gives us more damage reduction, which is extremely important, and also close enemy damage. Come up, grab tricks of the trade, and head out of this board into the cheap shot board. Come up, and now there's 2 pathways you can go. You can go into the damage reduction, which from elites, which might be good, but because we are already like stunning the mobs really quickly, I don't think we really need to grab the damage reduction. We can just go up, grab the damage to crowd control and critical strike damage, and head over to grab these 2 glyphs here because we need to get the turf glyph, and then grab a bunch of strength. So we're going to try to get all the strength we can in this board, and while we're trying to get the strength, we might as well grab the damage to slowed and grab it damage to crowd control. And we're going to be eventually getting Penton Greaves for the permanent chill, so we'll basically have like permanent damage reduction from slows. Now there are 2 pathways you can go. This one is going to be going into the hunting stratagem board, primarily for the glyph. We're going to be pathing down to grab the control glyph, which is going to give us like 10 to 20% additional damage because of Penton Greaves and cold imbuement, and additionally crowd control damage from intelligence. So we're going to path, grab all the intelligence we possibly can, and also grab the core damage while we're here because one, it does a lot of extra damage, and it's really good. And then as we progress, we're going to go up from the cheap shot board up into the exploit weakness board. Go left to grab the glyph because glyphs are extremely important. To grab the closer, which is going to give us cutthroat damage and damage reduction. And in this board, we want to grab all the intelligence we can and grab the rare nodes while we're there. Head up, grab the vulnerable damage glyph, and then grab exploit weakness. Head out of the board, and we might as well get the damage reduction from vulnerable. Head out of the board into the Eldritch Bounty, which is the imbuement board, and head down into the glyph. Grab the increased damage with imbued skills and cooldown reduction, which is extremely important in this build. We want to have a lot of cooldown reduction, and grab all the intelligence nodes. And because we're here, we need to grab this intelligence node. We grab the rare node dosage and the imbued skill damage. And then we want to head out and grab the Eldritch Bounty glyph up here. And that should be the board. And this is kind of what I came up with. I think the only thing that I might try to maximize a little bit better and change up the board a bit is in order to get a 6th glyph here in this board, because glyphs are extremely important for damage. They give you a lot of damage, a lot of cooldown reduction or damage reduction. And here I'd want to get the other crowd controlled increased damage glyph because that'll increase my damage. Or sorry, there's another glyph. I forget which one it is, but I want to grab it. And the only other like maximizing that I could come up with is trying to get the glyph in this board. But I'll do an updated Paragon board if I come up with another like 3 crafted build. But other than that, I think this build is going to be kind of the best Paragon board, at least for now, for this build. But anyways, guys, that'll be it for me today, and thank you so much for watching.